But I think also for adolescents in particular, what young people put out to the world is often a reflection of their identity and how their identity is developing at that point in time. There was this, and I never get the quote exactly right, but when I was studying adolescent health, there was this quote that was about, don't judge an adolescent for the clothing that they choose or the makeup that they wear or, who they hang around with, because oftentimes it's young people trying out different identities and different ways of being. And what I think some of these online environments allow is young people to actually explore that in different ways. It might be because of the groups that they join online or the photos that they take of themselves or what they care about or what they're interested in as a reflection, of who they are and their identity as that develops. And it is, I think, really important to remember that what you put out there online when you're 16 may not actually be the identity that you want to project to the world when you're 25 or 26. But that's part of, I guess, growing up and realising that, your opinions on things will change and those kind of things. Like I remember when I was in high school, you'd write on all of your notebooks, the bands you were into or, the movie celebrities that you admired, that kind of thing. What we see now is young people projecting that online. Their Facebook profile might be a reflection of the bands that they're into, the celebrities they admire, the sports they play or the sports they're into, the ideas that they might have about political or social issues or, a whole range of things, in the same way that we used to scribble them on our notebooks and then you'd throw the notebook out at the end of the year because you were into something totally different. So,
but I think that's the thing that I would have killed for, Facebook when I was 16. Yeah. To be able to kind of connect up with people about mutual interests, whereas, what I liked, nobody else seemed to like. And I think there are so many, I think that whilst in some ways, obviously, there are inherent risks, at the same time, it's something that I think I would have really benefited from, to be able to express myself in those ways and to communicate with other people about shared interests. So,
The other thing I think is important to bring up in this sort of scenario is to say, I think that, and you two might disagree, but I think that in 10 years' time, the concept of what's appropriate as far as, old photos of you drunk in the gutter is going to be very, very different.
No, I completely agree.
I think that in 10 years' time, we're going to see no longer being so much necessarily about whether people can dig up stuff from your past and everything else, because in effect, a lot of people will have it. And so I think the solution isn't always to apply, I guess, what people see currently as appropriate versus inappropriate content and how young people are treating content in that fashion and saying, but, if I had content like that up at my age, right now, my boss wouldn't like that very much or something like that, is that in 10 years' time, there might be new tools, there might be new services, the internet might not exist, not that I think that's going to happen. But I think the entire paradigm, I think, by that time will have changed by the time that these young people are growing up to the extent of actually having the potential for these things to come back and bite. And I'm sure there'll be examples where they do, but I think on the whole, I don't think it's actually going to be a real significant issue.
No, I completely agree. I think there'll just be, and I think we're seeing it now, but I think increasingly there's an understanding that people do develop and people do change, and that we're not all perfect. And I think there'll be less of an expectation to have this kind of facade, I suppose, of perfection, and that we all have lived lives,
So is that really more about, or something about the age of Facebook and technology, social media now, and we're going to learn some lessons from it, so that when my grandkids who are 2 and 4 get up to using Facebook and social media, that they're going to have a different way of thinking about it because of what young people have learnt now.
Absolutely. I think it's, the whole thing is a huge, extremely steep learning curve.
So it's a big experiment, really.
Yeah, exactly. And the great thing with young people is that they're able to really quickly and easily react and respond to changes, and they're actually quite sensitive to changes around the network.
He says they.
I know.
He was 21.
So he's in that group.
Exactly. Well, we are quite sensitive to the changes. And you look at things like when Facebook changes their privacy settings, and immediately half the young people will be posting stuff in their profiles saying, "Oh, look out! Watch out! Facebook's changed their privacy."
Yeah.
Like they're actually very sensitive to that sort of change, and sort of fairly aware of it. And I think in some ways they're more sensitive and aware of that change than a lot of the older people on these networks.
Yeah.
And I think young people often moderate their own use of technology as well. I mean, we're sort of starting to see young people incorporating practices like a technology-free day into their lives where, they might actually have a day where they don't check their social media profiles. And it's really interesting. You sort of watch it, some of the young people that I work with, and they'll kind of go, I'm going offline for a couple of days. It's not that there's anything wrong, it's that they want to actually take a bit of time out. And it came up at a school we were working with a couple of weeks ago where instead of doing the 40-hour famine and not eating to raise money for World Vision, people were actually having what they were calling a Facebook famine and actually having a 40-hour period where they didn't engage with social media as a way of actually, raising a bit of money, but also having a bit of a time out and a bit of a break. And you do sort of see that oftentimes with young people. They will kind of have some periods of time where they're super engaged with these networks and, like their peer groups face-to-face, might also have times when that's a bit out of favour or that's not, working for them at that particular point in time. So they do sort of have a really good radar about this stuff. I just need a bit of space from this, or, actually this is a time when I really want to connect and really want to be part of a community.
Can I offer another, this is a different perspective, but looking at regards to young people's mental health or anyone really, with technology, the less amount of sleep that young people are getting to what they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Because someone goes to sleep but they leave their mobile phone on, their friend might ring them at 2 in the morning to see something's going on.
Yep.
Woken them up, or because someone's saying that some parents might grab all the laptops and all at the moment, but there's always ways of getting around that.
Yeah.
People are smart and they've got ways of still being able to get on electronic device, but
I don't know.
what impact does that have on people?
Yeah.
I think that's a lot less. I don't know, I'm speaking from N=1 here, I'm speaking from personal anecdotal type stuff. But I think that's a lot less of an issue than is generally portrayed. I mean, in the last 4 years or so, my mobile phone number is on the internet. I've shown it in front of groups of 200 students and said, call me if you ever need any help. Like, I've had a significant number of people who have been exposed to my mobile phone number and it hasn't changed in 4 years. But I don't think I've ever gotten a phone call like bizarrely out of hours or anything like that. And so I think there is still that, I guess, level of respect. I'm sure I've gotten the drunk phone calls from personal friends, but I think that's just part of everyone's life. But I think as far as, that accessibility and the way in which technology has the potential to connect people in that negative manner, I think it's a lot less of an issue, because I think in the same way that, I wouldn't necessarily want someone intruding on me at 4 o'clock in the morning, the person that might be potentially intruding on me wouldn't want me to do it back to them. And so there is a bit of that sort of golden rule type behaviour that does, I think, occur. But I think the other thing that Michelle didn't really talk about very much in her presentation is the concept of belonging, and that whole idea around identity, around young people creating an identity for themselves, and that sense of belonging to a group, and self-belonging and self-awareness, and their knowledge about where they fit in the grander scheme of things, and connecting with people with similar interests and things like that. That real sense of belonging, there is actually a lot of research that shows that social media really has increased young people's ability to connect and get that sense of belonging through that medium, specifically through that medium.
Not just young people.
People, in the general community. There's some really great research. It's actually quite old now, but we know that for young people who are same-sex attracted, they're 3 to 6 times more likely to attempt to take their own lives. And it's a complex scenario around the experience of particularly homophobia and discrimination. But for a lot of these young people, they often feel quite isolated. They're trying to negotiate issues around identity. And Lynn Hillier wrote a really great paper that actually demonstrated that for a lot of these young people, actually being able to meet other young people who were gay was a really, really important way of recognising that they weren't alone, that they actually had a community of people that they belonged to, and that had enormous benefits for their well-being.